Hi, everybody. Welcome to the course of World History. I am Mr. Samuelson, and today we are looking at feudalism and manorialism. And we're going to take it kind of one at a time, starting with feudalism. So our essential questions here, how did feudalism and manorialism create order in the medieval world? Let's start with feudalism. Again, here we're going to start with a discussion on lords and vassals. The most important relationship within the feudal system is between lords and their vassals. That is, the lords and the other people who serve them. Now, vassals are given land to hold. Okay, so a lord has a huge amount of land that they hold. It's theirs. I'm in charge. I'm the lord. The vassals are given a part of that land, and they get to make profit on that land in exchange for services that they provide to the lord in return. That is the basic formula of the feudal relationship. You get to run some of my land and profit from that land. In return, you're going to do certain things for me. So the land that was held by the vassal is used for their profit. They can do with that land as they wish with very little regulation. And usually this land would be turned into a manor. More on manors later. Now the vassal, who can be a noble or can be a knight, okay, can be a duke, a count, a baron, a knight, subdivides the land into smaller holdings. And they lease out these lands in return for service and obligation from smaller landholders. So I might hold some land from the king and then use that land and break it up into 6 or 7 pieces and have vassals of my own. So they are vassals to me. I am a vassal of the king. And that is the feudal hierarchy. Now, in feudal Europe, nearly all wealth came from agriculture. It was raising crops. It was growing things from the ground. Serfs, peasants, okay, serfs are peasants who are kind of tied to the land. They're not allowed to move, okay? They belong to the land. So this group of serfs, who are peasants, raise crops and animals on the land that they own. They don't own the land. It's actually the lesser lords or knights. Serfs, they don't get to own anything. In return for their land, serfs pay a portion of their produce to the landlord. So a serf might owe 80% of their produce to a knight. The knight collects all the produce from a bunch of serfs and owes 60% of that to a count. And then the count then owes 60% of what he collects from all of the different knights to the king. And so it works its way up in a sort of pyramid. Now, obligations. In feudalism, everyone owed something to somebody. Serfs owed rent to knights and lesser lords. Knights and lesser lords owed rents and military service to greater lords. When called upon to fight, they had to fight. That's part of the deal. And great lords owed taxes and military service to the king. The king sits up at the top of this feudal hierarchy. Now, kings, in return, what do kings have to do? They don't just get this stuff for free. No, they have to provide protection to their vassals. If the kingdom is invaded and it's Count so-and-so whose land is most threatened, the king has promised to defend that count's land. So he has to raise an army and send that army off to defend his vassals. Great lords had to protect lesser lords, so a count would be responsible for defending a knight's land that's being attacked. And they use the system to help keep peace within the kingdom. So knights then protect their serfs and so on and so forth. It is a protection racket. You give me resources, I turn that around and I protect you. Now, feudal armies. When kingdoms went to war, kings would call upon their vassals to meet this feudal obligation. Lords ordered their knights to gather men. Knights pulled serfs off of their farms. And these feudal armies that came together were really just made up mostly of farmers. People who had just been pulled from the field to go fight in the war. Now, the problem arrives here, like the farmers need to work or nobody gets fed. The whole feudal economy collapses. So warfare in feudal times only took place between planting and harvest. while the crops are growing in the field, because the peasants, the serfs, needed to be back on the land to bring in the crops, or everybody loses. Now, what if you're outside of this system? You're not a part of the feudal hierarchy. You're called a freeman. Freemen were small landholders or craftsmen who were not bound to serfdom. They were not a serf. They were not in that hierarchy. They did not owe services to a knight or a lesser lord. Now, they were uncommon. They're not typical within this early Middle Ages. What did they do? Well, they might own a shop. They might work a small farm. And they usually lived in or near towns. Towns wound up being something that were outside of the feudal hierarchy. So how do you become a serf? How do you get stuck into this situation? Well, a freeman might become a serf in two broad ways. One, by force or necessity. A powerful knight simply comes in and says, yeah, you're not free anymore. I'm going to bind you into serfdom. And I have the right to do that because I have a sword and you don't. And who's going to defend you? You don't have a lord or knight who has promised you protection. So, yeah, you're mine now. And sometimes it happens by necessity. The man is starving. His family is starving. And so they agree to enter serfdom in return for the protection that offers. So what is a manor then? The manor is the heart of this feudal territory. It's the residence of whoever holds the power in the area. And the manor includes a manor house right here, and all of the land that is governed by whatever lord or landed knight holds the power in that area. And it's an essential part of this feudal economy. Oh, forgot the slide heading here. Origins of manors. So manors, manorialism was originated with Roman villas, okay? Wealthy Romans and their farms out in the country. These Roman leaders held these land estates far from Rome, which they used to acquire wealth. Now, after the central government of Rome collapsed and there was no Rome anymore, many leaders will retreat to their villas and they try to survive in that villa on their own. So the economy, how did they survive there? Well, the manor is essentially a self-sufficient economy. Each manor exists in a way that it can survive by itself. Everything used to run the manor is produced within the manor's land. This means they produce their own food, their own cloth, their own tools, lumber, wine, anything that they want. The manor is meant to exist without any need for trade. So in many ways, this manor would resemble a small village or a small town. In this system, then, they would need to have a lot of structures to provide themselves with supplies. They would need to have a stable, a mill to make flour, blacksmith, tannery, brewery. Most, indeed almost all, would have their own church, all within their manor lands. And for most of the medieval period, tradesmen, who are not usually much better than serfs, these are the freemen who have a trade, would get hired on by the manor. So if you were a master blacksmith, you might not be a serf, but you would live within this system. Eventually, and importantly, this did improve. So let's talk about tradesmen. Tradesmen are those members of a manor who specialize in a non-farming skill. Initially, tradesmen had little more authority than the serfs, but that authority does grow. Tradesmen eventually grow into a middle class that overthrows the feudal system, but we're quite a ways away from that. In order to protect those living in the manor, the lords enter into this feudal relationship. We talked about this earlier. The lord of a manor swears to serve and pay taxes to a greater lord or a king in return for this protection, and therefore the manor is protected. The knights were a key part of this. They would have their own small land in return to services to a greater lord. And within that manor, the knight would either have their own manor house, typically a smaller one than a lord. And their responsibility is then to provide protection to the serfs and to oversee the work of serfs and tradesmen. The obligations of the manor itself, the lords or knights who run the manor owe their protectors service, and that service included military aid, as discussed earlier, taxes, usually in the form of food rent, and homage and fealty. This is swearing publicly that I am your man and that I will serve you. Now, church lands also existed within this system. Within each manor, it's likely that the church controlled some land, and this land was worked by serfs in agreement with the Lord, and its income became the property of the church. This serves to provide priests and monks with the resources and income that they need, and it also serves a part of their wealth to the local bishop, so the Catholic Church as a whole would benefit from the manorial system as well. All right. I hope you learned something today on feudalism and manorialism, and I'll see you next time. Farewell.